How does a world addicted to convenience survive when the one invisible ingredient that makes every single modern convenience possible suddenly disappears overnight? This is Critical Path, where we explore stories and innovations about our global supply chain that connect our world to your everyday life. Picture this. It is a completely average Tuesday morning. You wake up, you stretch, and you blindly reach over to your nightstand to grab your toothbrush. But instead of grasping a familiar smooth handle, your hand closes on empty air. The molded polypropylene plastic handle is gone. The synthetic nylon bristles have vanished. Confused, you stumble into your kitchen, desperate for coffee. But your sleek, heat-resistant coffee maker is nowhere to be found. In its place is a terrifying, skeletal mess of bare copper wires and raw heating elements sitting in a puddle of water. You try to grab a plastic trash bag to clean up the mess, but the entire roll under your sink has evaporated into thin air. Now, this is not a scene from a low-budget science fiction thriller. This is not the plot of an obscure Twilight Zone episode. This is the incredibly high-stakes, terrifyingly plausible endpoint of a global supply chain crisis involving a substance you have probably never heard of. Most people on this planet have never heard the word, and even fewer could pick it out of a police lineup. Yet, this highly volatile, highly flammable, straw-colored liquid is the invisible scaffolding upon which our entire modern world is built. The substance is called naphtha, and if we run out of it, the modern world essentially loses its skin. The problem we are facing right now is what industry insiders call a silent heart attack of the global supply chain. You see, naphtha is the primary feedstock, the main ingredient, for the world's steam crackers. These are massive industrial titans that function like molecular sledgehammers, breaking down raw oil into the fundamental building blocks of literally every consumer good you have touched today. When the supply of this magical liquid falters, the ripple effects are not just bad for business, they are catastrophic for society. We are talking about a full-blown crisis, where hospitals run out of intravenous bags, where fresh food rots in warehouses because there are no plastic containers to protect it, and where the entire global automotive industry grinds to a devastating halt because it cannot manufacture a single dashboard, a single door panel, or a single tire. It is an incredibly high-stakes, seemingly impossible puzzle. How do we survive when the dough of the global bakery disappears? In the spring of 2026, this theoretical nightmare became a very harsh reality. A massive military conflict in the Middle East effectively severed the global energy jugular, trapping 5 million barrels of oil products a day inside the Persian Gulf. As the prices for naphtha took a parabolic upward turn, surging by an eye-watering 66% in a matter of weeks, the global economy looked in the mirror and realized it had a fatal dependency. From the small to medium enterprises of South Korea to the massive industrial giants of Japan, the frantic cry for help was exactly the same. They said, "We have the food, we have the cars, we have the medicine, but we have absolutely nothing to put them in." To understand how we get out of this mess, we have to look deep into the belly of the beast. We have to look at the refining tower, the steam cracker, and the deeply counterintuitive mechanics of the global oil market. So what exactly is naphtha? To the uninitiated, oil is just oil. You pull it out of the ground, it is black, it is sticky, and you put it in your car to make it go. But to a refinery chemist, crude oil is a complex, beautiful, multi-layer cake of hydrocarbons. And naphtha is that awkward, highly volatile layer, sitting right between the light gases at the top and the heavier kerosene in the middle. If crude oil were a high school, naphtha would be the unrefined teenager. It has extremely high potential, it is wildly flammable, and it is prone to hanging out in multiple cliques. Sometimes it appears as a fuel, sometimes it appears as an industrial solvent, but most importantly, it acts as the raw dough for the entire petrochemical bakery. Chemically speaking, naphtha is a chaotic mixture of hydrocarbons generally having between 5 and 12 carbon atoms. It typically constitutes about 15% to 30% of crude oil by weight. While it shares a molecular neighborhood with the gasoline you put in your car, it lacks the sophisticated social skills of finished fuel. Gasoline is pampered. Gasoline is treated to luxurious octane-boosting additives to ensure it behaves politely inside an internal combustion engine. Naphtha, on the other hand, is mostly raw and unblended. It would be a terrible, engine-knocking fuel for your Honda Civic, but it is the absolute perfect candidate for total chemical destruction. Refineries generally split this unrefined teenager into two different grades. Light naphtha is the sprinter of the group. It consists of smaller molecules with 5 to 6 carbons and boils at lower temperatures, somewhere between 30 degrees Celsius and 90 degrees Celsius. This light grade is the absolute gold standard for making ethylene, which is the chemical grandparent of the plastic bags you use at the grocery store. Then you have heavy naphtha. Heavy naphtha is the marathon runner of the group, packing 6 to 12 carbons and boasting a boiling range of 90 degrees Celsius to 200 degrees Celsius. This heavy hitter is usually destined for a terrifying piece of machinery called a catalytic reformer, where it is brutally bullied into becoming high-octane gasoline or aromatic building blocks like benzene, toluene, and xylene. This duality, this bizarre split personality, is exactly why a shortage of naphtha does not just make your plastic cups more expensive, it makes them vanish entirely. Now the magic, and let us be honest, the complete madness, happens at a facility called a steam cracker. If you have ever laid awake at night, wondering how a dirty pool of liquid oil magically becomes a clean, translucent plastic bag, the answer is violence. Pure, unadulterated thermal violence. Steam cracking is the industrial equivalent of taking a molecular sledgehammer to a long-chain hydrocarbon and seeing what tiny pieces fly off in the aftermath. It is one of the most endothermic reactions known to humanity, meaning it requires a staggering, almost incomprehensible amount of heat. So much heat, in fact, that the process itself is a major contributor to global carbon emissions. The process starts by mixing naphtha with superheated steam and pumping it into massive furnace coils. The temperatures inside these furnaces are astronomical, ranging from 700 degrees Celsius to 900 degrees Celsius, with the actual metal walls of the tubes often reaching 1100 degrees Celsius. In this literal inferno, the naphtha molecules are subjected to thermal cracking, a process that lasts only a microscopic fraction of a second. We are talking typically between 0.08 and 0.8 seconds. It is a blink of an eye. During this microscopic window of terror, the long hydrocarbon chains are ripped apart into smaller, unsaturated hydrocarbons called olefins. The two biggest prizes in this game are ethylene and propylene. Think of it exactly like a bakery. The naphtha is the flour and water dough. The steam cracker is the brick oven. And the ethylene and propylene are the bread and the muffins. If you do not have the dough, the oven stays stone cold, and the shelves at the grocery store stay completely empty. Naphtha is the ultimate Goldilocks feedstock. While ethane, which is sourced from natural gas, produces a lot of ethylene, it produces almost no propylene or butadiene. Naphtha, however, produces a massive, diverse buffet of chemicals. When you crack naphtha, you get a yield of 25% to 35% ethylene, which goes to make your polyethylene bags. You also get 14% to 18% propylene, which becomes the polypropylene for your fancy iced coffee cups and your yogurt containers. You also get butadiene, which is the essential, non-negotiable ingredient for making the synthetic rubber in your car tires. When naphtha is in short supply, we do not just lose one single type of plastic. We lose the entire interconnected ecosystem of modern materials. This brings us to the logistics. The global supply chain for naphtha is a high-wire act performed over a pit of geopolitical lava. In the first quarter of 2026, the world finally lost its balance and fell off that wire. The catalyst was a major, tragic conflict in the Middle East that effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passage of water that handles roughly 1/5 of the entire world's oil supply. For naphtha specifically, the Strait of Hormuz is the main street of the global economy. Asian petrochemical markets, particularly those in South Korea, Japan, and China, are heavily, almost exclusively, dependent on imported naphtha from the Arab Gulf. When the straits closed, 2.8 million barrels per day of naphtha and light petroleum products were essentially locked inside a giant vault with no key. The global logistics response was an immediate, desperate, and wildly expensive scramble. Shipping routes were hastily diverted all the way around the Cape of Good Hope, at the bottom of Africa. This massive detour turned a standard 25-day round trip into an agonizing 50-day odyssey. Think about the math on that for a second. This detour did not just double the transit time, it effectively slashed the entire global shipping capacity by 40% overnight, because the boats were taking twice as long to do the same job. Prices in Asia skyrocketed. The cost of physical naphtha rocketing from $622.58 per metric ton to $756 per metric ton in a matter of days. Inventory levels went into a freefall, dropping 29% week over week. Steam cracker utilization rates in Northeast Asia plummeted from a healthy 85% to 90%, down to a disastrous 45% to 55%. This was not just a numbers game for wealthy traders wearing expensive suits in high-rise buildings. In the real world, the lean inventory strategy that many Asian countries heavily rely on became a complete suicide pact. Keeping only a few weeks of stock on hand to save money on working capital is great when the ocean is peaceful, but it is fatal when the boats stop moving. Within weeks, small and medium enterprises in South Korea were warning of chain shutdowns as they literally ran out of the plastic pellets needed for food packaging and waste bags. In Japan, firms were forced to cut the production of home appliances and construction materials because they simply did not have the raw petroleum byproducts. To truly appreciate the gravity of a naphtha shortage, one must look closely at the humbly vital links in the chain, the plastic pellets themselves. These tiny little resins are the raw material for absolutely everything, from your morning cereal bag to your car's interior. When naphtha becomes scarce, these pellets become the most expensive and sought-after building blocks on the planet. Let us look at a real-world example that perfectly illustrates this absurdity. In South Korea, the tofu industry provided a stark, terrifying example of the crisis. Manufacturers, like the famous Gangneung Chodang Dubu, suddenly received notices that their container and vinyl suppliers could absolutely no longer meet their demand. Now put yourself in their shoes. If you cannot put the tofu in a plastic container, you cannot sell the tofu. It did not matter one bit how much soy milk they had sitting in their vats. Without naphtha-derived packaging to seal it, the food was effectively non-existent to the consumer. This is the hidden, terrifying mechanism of modern hunger. It is not always a lack of food grown in the field. It is often a lack of the synthetic plastic that keeps that food safe and transportable. The automotive industry, which was already staggering and reeling from years of microchip shortages, suddenly found a brand new Achilles heel. Modern cars, despite what the commercials tell you about leather and steel, are essentially giant plastic shells rolling on synthetic rubber wheels. If the supply of high-value synthetic resins like acrylonitrile butadiene styrene becomes unstable, you cannot build a dashboard. You cannot build a door panel. You cannot build a seat frame. Your car factory becomes a very expensive parking lot for unfinished metal frames. Even the booming electric vehicle market is completely trapped in this oily web. Electric vehicles rely on being lightweight to maximize their battery range. To make them lightweight, manufacturers use specialized naphtha-derived polymer composites and battery casings. No naphtha means no lightweight plastics, which means the heavy cars cannot drive as far, which means the grand, shining green revolution hits a very sudden, very oily brick wall. But if you think a lack of plastic grocery bags and car dashboards is a minor inconvenience, let us take a horrifying walk into your local hospital. Modern medicine is, quite literally, built entirely on naphtha. From the exact moment you enter an emergency room, you are surrounded by its chemical derivatives. The sterile syringe that delivers your life-saving pain medication? That is made from naphtha-based polypropylene, the flexible, clear tubing that carries precious oxygen to a struggling patient's lungs. That is made from naphtha-derived polyvinyl chloride. The very pharmaceutical drugs themselves? They are often synthesized in laboratories using naphtha-derived solvents like hexane and toluene. A profound analysis conducted by health policy experts in 2026 highlighted a truly terrifying reality. Between 90% to 95% of generic sterile injectables, which are the absolute foundational workhorse medications of acute care, rely on starting materials and active pharmaceutical ingredients sourced from just a few key locations, primarily in China and India. These manufacturing facilities absolutely rely on a continuous, uninterrupted flow of naphtha to produce the chemical solvents and precursors necessary for drug synthesis. When the 2026 naphtha crisis hit, the notoriously brittle medical supply chain snapped right in half. Hospitals were forced to make agonizing, life-or-death decisions. They were rationing intravenous bags. They were switching critical patients to oral medications wherever physically possible just to conserve sterile fluids. This was not a conversation about price or budgets. It was about the physical, literal availability of the standard of care. We suddenly found ourselves living in a dystopian world where a patient could survive a massive heart attack only to die a week later because there was no sterile plastic tubing available to deliver their follow-up treatment. It is a sobering, horrifying reminder that our personal, biological health is intimately tied to a barrel of oil sitting in the Middle East. Now, we come to the big revelation, the aha moment that usually blows people's minds and ruins dinner parties. Most of us generally think that saving the planet means we just need to drive our cars less. We think that if we all switch to bicycles or electric vehicles, we will leave more oil in the ground, the birds will sing, the sky will clear, and the world will be a better place. But here is the massive counterintuitive twist that the oil companies know all too well. Your gas-guzzling sport utility vehicle is the direct, mortal competitor of your plastic sandwich bag. Inside the vast maze of the refinery, naphtha is the ultimate swing player. As we discussed earlier, heavy naphtha can be processed in a catalytic reformer to make high-octane gasoline blending components. Or, the exact same naphtha can be sent to a steam cracker to make plastics. This creates a beautifully brutal, cannibalistic relationship between transportation and manufacturing. The refinery is constantly deciding which of its children gets to eat. When gasoline demand is extremely high, let us say during a busy summer travel season when everyone is taking road trips, refineries literally eat the naphtha to boost their gasoline production. When gasoline demand drops, or when the world decides to build a massive fleet of new petrochemical plants, like the enormous industrial expansions currently happening in China and India, the refinery pivots and sends that same naphtha to make plastic. The profound aha moment is exactly this. In a global supply crisis, this friendly competition turns into a vicious zero-sum war. A national government has to choose between keeping the pumps full of gas to prevent a massive political riot, or keeping the factories full of naphtha to prevent a total economic shutdown. This is the hidden mechanism of the shortage. We are not just running out of oil, we are running out of the fundamental choice to have both cheap transportation and cheap convenience. And as gasoline demand begins to flatten globally due to the rise of electric vehicles, refineries are actually being purposefully redesigned as crude-to-chemicals complexes. This means that our glorious future green world will actually be even more dependent on naphtha, not less. If you are sitting there thinking you have personally escaped naphtha's oily reach because you proudly carry a canvas tote bag and drink your ethically sourced water from a heavy glass bottle, you need to think again. Naphtha is the invisible ghost in the machine of your entire home. It is lurking in the heavy-duty adhesives that hold your wooden furniture together. It is woven deeply into the synthetic fibers of your natural-looking living room rug. It is literally in the paint currently drying on your walls. Consider the humble acoustic or electric guitar. To a luthier, which is a person who makes or repairs guitars, naphtha is an absolute cult chemical. Specifically known as varnish makers and painters naphtha, it is quite literally the only solvent gentle and safe enough to clean the delicate nitrocellulose lacquer on a vintage acoustic or a classic electric guitar without instantly melting the finish into a sticky puddle. It magically dissolves gross finger oils and stage grime, and then it evaporates into thin air in mere seconds, leaving absolutely zero residue. Without a steady supply of naphtha, the high-end musical instrument industry would instantly lose its primary cleaning and surface preparation tool. Your bathroom is essentially a petrochemical playground. That expensive dry shampoo you spray in your hair so you can skip a wash? That aerosol can use as liquefied petroleum gas as a propellant. Your supposedly refreshing mint toothpaste? It relies on a chemical called poloxama 407, which is a very common petroleum derivative that ensures your minty flavor does not awkwardly separate into a gross puddle of oil on your toothbrush. Even your favorite eco-friendly cotton shirt might actually be 40% polyester, which is a synthetic petroleum fiber that sheds microscopic plastics every single time you put it in the washing machine. We are so deeply and intimately embedded in this naphthaverse that a total shortage would not just be an economic hit, it would be a fundamental, traumatic stripping of modern human comfort. To actually fix a problem this incredibly massive, you have to understand the science at the absolute molecular level. People always ask, why cannot we just use something else? Why not crack something greener? The answer lies in the unique, unyielding stoichiometry of naphtha cracking. When we heat liquid naphtha to 850 degrees Celsius, we are not just making it really hot, we are creating a violent free radical storm. The chemical reaction starts with a phase called initiation, where a massive carbon-carbon bond breaks violently to form two smaller, highly reactive free radicals. These wild radicals then go on an absolute propagation spree. They violently snatch hydrogen atoms from other innocent molecules and undergo a process called beta scission, where the radical splits right at a specific bond to create a smaller radical and a wonderfully stable olefin, like our friends ethylene or propylene. This chaotic free radical mechanism is exactly what makes naphtha so incredibly valuable. It produces a perfectly narrow distributed range of alkanes and olefins that are exquisitely sized for the global plastics industry. Trying to do this exact same process with heavier, thicker oil is like trying to build a delicate Swiss watch out of cast iron manhole covers. The pieces are way too big, they are far too messy, and they produce way too much coke. Coke is an industrial term for solid carbon buildup that eventually clogs the delicate furnace tubes of the cracker. To keep these tubes clear and the chemical yield high, brilliant engineers have to flawlessly balance residence time, which is how long the gas stays inside the fire, and steam dilution, which is injecting steam to lower the partial pressure of the volatile hydrocarbons. It is an incredibly high-precision chemical tightrope walk, and any slight deviation in the quality of the naphtha feedstock causes the entire multi-billion-dollar system to completely fail. So what is the plan? If traditional naphtha is a dirty, vulnerable, geopolitical nightmare of a feedstock, the global industry is desperately betting its entire future on two shining alternatives: bio-naphtha and chemical recycling. Bio-naphtha is the feel-good, public relations-friendly version of our liquid hero. It is magically produced from renewable sources, like recycled waste cooking oil, discarded vegetable fats, and complex lignocellulosic biomass. The massive, undeniable advantage here is the drop-in replacement factor. You can literally take a barrel of bio-naphtha and pour it directly into a multi-billion-dollar steam cracker that was originally designed for fossil oil, and it works exactly the same. The machinery does not know the difference. This clever trick allows massive consumer brands to loudly claim they are using circular, green plastic without actually having to spend billions rebuilding their entire established supply chain. However, the current math on bio-naphtha is incredibly painful. Creating bio-naphtha is significantly punishingly more expensive to produce than traditional fossil naphtha. This massive cost difference makes it a luxury, boutique item that completely relies on generous government tax credits and massive Scope 3 carbon reduction commitments from major, wealthy corporations. Without those subsidies, it costs 2 to 3 times as much, making your sustainable yogurt cup an extremely expensive luxury good. Currently, the commercial scale is relatively tiny, sitting at around a $3.1 billion market, compared to the over 300 million tons of fossil naphtha used globally. Then we have chemical recycling, also known as pyrolysis, which is an even more mind-blowing concept. Pyrolysis involves taking old, dirty, mixed plastic waste, the exact garbage that traditional mechanical recycling absolutely cannot handle, and heating it up in the absence of oxygen until it magically melts back down into a liquid pyrolysis oil. This dark oil is essentially a synthetic, man-made naphtha. Brilliant researchers have recently developed tandem catalytic reactions that can successfully convert low-density polyethylene right back into a staggering naphtha yield of 89.5%, boasting an incredible 96.8% chemical selectivity. It is the absolute closest thing humanity has ever found to a magical fountain of youth for plastic garbage. But, as with all magic, there is a massive, terrible catch. The pyrolysis process is incredibly, eye-wateringly energy-intensive. To raise a single ton of discarded plastic waste to a scorching 650 degrees Celsius requires nearly 3.0 million British thermal units of pure energy. In our frantic, noble rush to recycle our waste and save the turtles, we might actually be emitting significantly more carbon dioxide than if we had just pumped virgin oil straight out of the ground to begin with. In fact, some studies show that pyrolysis emissions can be 50% to 400% higher than virgin production. This bizarre paradox is the absolute central conflict of the next decade of industrial engineering. Do we prioritize perfect circularity, meaning we have absolutely zero physical waste in our landfills, or do we prioritize strict net zero, meaning we have absolutely zero carbon emissions in our atmosphere? Right now, science says we cannot easily have both. To truly see where we are going, we have to look back at where we have already been. Humanity has a terrible habit of forgetting its own history. The legendary oil crises of 1973 and 1979 were the dramatic dress rehearsals for today's terrifying naphtha shortage. During the infamous 1973 Arab oil embargo, the global price of oil quadrupled almost overnight, and the Western world abruptly realized it was, quite literally, floating to victory on a fragile wave of imported oil. The societal disruptions back then were completely bizarre and profoundly disruptive. In the Netherlands, the panicked government responded to the shortage by formally declaring mandatory carless Sundays. The bustling, noisy streets of Amsterdam were completely emptied of motorized cars and were suddenly filled only with thousands of bicycles. People romanticized it. They gushed about the peace and the quiet, but the underlying reason was not environmentalism. It was a frantic, desperate attempt by the state to save precious fuel to keep their vital industries from collapsing. Over in the United States, the gasoline lines at the pumps became so incredibly long that frustrated motorists actually wasted up to 150,000 barrels of oil every single day just sitting there, idling their hot engines while waiting for their turn to buy gas. The tragic lesson we totally failed to learn from the 1970s was the paramount importance of diversification. We aggressively built massive fortresses like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to protect our cars and our military, but we did absolutely nothing to protect our delicate petrochemical feedstocks. We protected the fuel, but we forgot about the dough. Now, in 2026, we are finding out the hard way that while we can proudly drive a battery-powered electric vehicle to the grocery store, we absolutely cannot eat our food out of one. The infamous geopolitical oil weapon has fundamentally evolved. It is no longer just about stopping the cars from driving. It is about stopping the massive factories that make the plastic containers that hold the food that feeds the billions of people on this planet. We began this journey by looking at the terrifying, apocalyptic prospect of a world suddenly forced to live without plastic. We have seen firsthand that naphtha is not just some obscure, boring oil product meant for textbooks. It is the volatile, unrefined, completely indispensable dough of the modern human experience. We have bravely walked through the 900-degree fires of the brutal steam cracker and seen exactly how a single, localized shipping blockade in the Strait of Hormuz can instantly turn a bustling South Korean tofu factory into a desolate ghost town. We have uncovered the massive, mind-bending revelation that our gas-guzzling automobiles are the secret, bitter rivals of our life-saving medical supplies. We have learned that saving oil in the very near future might actually mean being forced to choose between a full tank of gasoline for your summer vacation and a sterile, clean intravenous bag for a sick relative in the emergency room. We have snooped into your medicine cabinet and your guitar case to find that naphtha's oily, invisible fingerprints are literally all over every single modern comfort we hold dear. The devastating global crisis of 2026 is a massive, blaring wake-up call for humanity. It aggressively tells us that our supposedly brilliant, lean and mean global supply chain is actually incredibly brittle and terrifyingly fragile. Whether we eventually find our salvation in the molecular fountain of youth promised by chemical recycling, or we hide behind the expensive green alibi of heavily subsidized bio-naphtha, one fundamental truth is absolutely certain: we can never, ever, take this invisible liquid for granted again. The cheap plastic cup currently sitting in your hand is not just a piece of disposable trash. It is a high-stakes, geopolitical, chemical masterpiece. And in a world where absolutely everything is intimately connected by a microscopic chain of 5 to 12 carbon atoms, the absolute smallest shortage can have the most catastrophic impact imaginable. Keep your energy high, keep your eyes focused on the dough, and always remember, in the unforgiving game of global chemistry, naphtha is the only player that truly matters. What do you think? Are we too dependent on this invisible liquid? Or will human innovation find a way to replace it before it is too late? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for listening and watching. Please like and subscribe, and make sure to check out our other videos about the global supply chain.